to be here this afternoon. I'm going to start with a brief introduction and scene setting, if I may. As Sivan said, my name's Guy Grouse, and in my day job, which is important in today's context, I'm the Global Director of Education for Kidzania. For those of you who don't know, briefly, Kidzanias are 2/3 size cities for 4 to 14-year-old children, where children can independently experience the world of work. Numerous job choices, from pilot to surgeon to window cleaner, or in Moscow, diamond miner, or even YouTuber. And they become financially and entrepreneurially aware too. Our aim is to take children from inspiration to aspiration and get them to write their own narrative of the possible. And as part of this, we conduct and publish global educational research in partnership with, for example, the National Research University Higher School of Economics Institute of Education in Moscow, where I am also proud to be a visiting professor. This research around Kidzania's edutainment activities, in turn, emphasizes that there is much more to know and learn about children than just through the conventional schooling methods of attending, testing, and more testing, allowing us to better reimagine childhood, education, and possible futures. Edutainment combines the word education and entertainment. It refers to any form of entertainment that is educational. The goal of edutainment is to make learning enjoyable and fun. Edutainment is found inside and outside of classrooms and exists across several types of media. One of the often quoted definitions of edutainment. During a recent conversation with Manuel Rabate, director of the Louvre, Abu Dhabi, he confessed to viewing the museum as much as part of edutainment than anything else. In my book, edutainment is experience-based learning, and in Kidzania's book, for example, it aims to connect with purpose in school teaching and out-of-school learning. It aims to facilitate answering why questions. It allows young people to make sense of their world and write their own narrative of the possible from as young an age as possible. It is also first and foremost about learning and not about being taught. If you have a strong sense of purpose in life, you don't have to be pushed. Your passion will drive you there, so said Roy T. Bennett, author of The Light in the Heart. What is clear in my view is that a redefinition and resetting of purpose are highly desirable in reconsidering and making appropriately relevant again the education as opposed to the schooling of tomorrow. The question is how we can utilize this potentially huge innovative resource that is edutainment, and at the same time be confident around quality and purpose. And as we know, quality is never an accident. It is always the result of intelligent effort. To explore this journey through edutainment, from tainment to edu, and review what is edutainment's true educational potential, I'm very honored to be joined today by most eminent colleagues and friends, namely Professor Andreas Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills and Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Lord Jim Knight, Chief Education Advisor to TESS Global and former United Kingdom Minister of State for Schools. Professor Atara Sivan, Professor and Head of the Department of Education Studies at the Hong Kong Baptist University, and Eric Abrams, Chief Inclusion Officer of the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. Professor Sergey Kosaretsky, Director at the Pinsky Center of General and Extracurricular Education at the National Research University Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and Natalia Kiseleva, Deputy Minister of Education for Moscow. And finally, Professor Isak Froumin, Head of the Institute of Education at the aforementioned National Research University Higher School of Economics. Welcome to my guests, and if we could start with the questions, and if I please could start with Andreas Schleicher. Andreas, welcome, and thank you for being with us. Andreas, if I could please start with you and just ask, how does the current version of the PISA study take into account the out-of-school learning experience? And also, what is the value of out-of-school learning experiences, and in particular edutainment, taking into account PISA's expanding view of knowledge, skills, attitude, and values that children and young people need to shape their future?
Thank you, Geir. And first of all, thank you also for the work that you do. I think, your work has never been as relevant as it is today. I think one of the things the pandemic has brought home to all of us is that learning is not a transactional experience. It's always a relational experience. And learning is not a place, it's an activity. Now, I think this idea of student agency, you call it inspiration, aspiration, I think has become really the center of education, whether we like it or not. I think that has simply happened. But your question is about PISA. Let me give you a couple of really interesting results from our latest version of PISA, where students had contact with other people from other countries in school or out of school. They had a much more open view on the world. They had a much more open view to students from other cultures, from other countries. Whereas what they taught in the curriculum in history and social science is not visible in those kinds of outcomes. You can really see is what you do, not what you hear, that really matters. It's this agency-based learning. So that's one of the insights that the latest PISA assessment really brought home. The same where students had experiences, looked at issues from different lenses and perspectives. They had a much greater appreciation for new ideas, for other concepts. So it's really, I think, what we should take away. So we're trying to actually capture those kinds of aspects. And we looked also at something in these times, very important, cognitive resilience, we call it. To what extent are you going to try again when you fail? To what extent are you willing to approach things differently when you run into a deadlock? And again, those things are not caught, they are taught. They're not taught, they are caught by the environment in which you are. And you can see, take a country like Vietnam. I don't have data for Hong Kong, but I have data for Macau. And you can actually see these are top performing systems in math and science. But students come out almost on the bottom of the scale when it comes to, this kind of cognitive resilience. So I think we should, we need to have a broader picture. We need to be able to make that visible. And that's one of the things I think PISA didn't start out of like this, but it's really done a lot in this field to give greater emphasis to this idea of student agency.
Thank you, Andreas. I think it's a very interesting set of observations, and that, we're not alone in this. I just use the Kidsania example, but we hold anonymized, of course, the data on some 90 million children across 21 countries over 20 years. And we quite deliberately make that data available to researchers, not to write pretty books, but to be used. And of course, you at OECD would always be welcome to that, because some of the things that we found are about children's confidences, and there is that adage, isn't there? Bring me a confident child, and I'll bring you the grades you desire. It sits in that sphere. Andreas, recently the results of PISA 2018 were presented as part of the assessment of global competencies, as well as students' global and intercultural skills and attitudes. Do you think that these assessments particularly raise the question of how much we can rely on schools alone to build skills for the future?
Well, I wish we could rely more on schools. I wish we would rebuild our schools in a way that we can rely more on them. Because one thing is very clear. If you look at the world of technology around us, it's great to be connected with everyone in this global world, but actually technology tends to connect you with people who think like you, who work like you, who look like you. Actually, these echo chambers and silos and this polarization of our societies is, I think, one of the real threats, where we become, victims and slaves of algorithms. And I do think school has a very, very important role to build the antidotes to this, to give people real exposure to diversity, to other ways of thinking, to other cultures, to other ideas. But as I, just explained through the assessment of global competency, what is very clear is that those competencies are not developed in the classroom. They are developed by, walking with other people. They are developed by connecting with other people. So I wish that school would be a more active moderator of those processes. I don't think, this is going to come necessarily. In fact, what the global competency assessment also showed is how closely student attitudes are often mirroring the parental attitudes now. So if you want to, do something about it, public policy, I think, has a big role to play, and it's about creating a more active learning environment. I think we need to think harder about how do we configure the spaces, the people, the technology to achieve those kinds of learning goals. It's not going to happen by itself. It's not going to happen just by letting people explore the internet. No, I think it does require a deliberate, social process. But I'm not sure our schools are very well suited to serve that yet. No.
But maybe if we distinguish more clearly between schooling on the one side and education on the other, and explore the possible linkages rather than to assume that they're the same, because that's the reaction we quite often get. Yeah. I talk to lots, I'm sure, as you do, Andreas, I talk to lots of children all over the world, and I ask them the question, why do you go to school? And for my money, far too often, the answer is, because I have to.
Yeah.
And somehow it feels to me that if we can connect the out of school with the in school in order to allow the youngsters to explore purpose, then will OECD at some point deliberately seek to influence national education policies in that direction, you think?
Well, our Education 2030 project is very much about this agenda. It really looks at many different learning environments. In fact, we don't use the word education in this very much. It's really about learning and exploring. It's about this active process, not this consumption process. I think one of the real tragedies of the last 10, 15 years all over the world has been what I call the kind of commodification of education, where students became consumers, passive learners in the classroom, where teachers become service providers, where parents become clients. And that has created a very unhealthy distance. I think, we need to make this again a whole of society enterprise, where actually, each of us should ask ourselves, what can I do to facilitate education? The linkages, schools are very good to keep students inside and the rest of the world outside. That's basically the architecture of schooling. And I think, the linkage is the world of work. There are lots of things that we learn much better by working with real people on real problems that have real consequences than by learning it in abstract in the classroom, secondhand even. These are people who communicate to us who don't even, as a young person, you figure out very quickly what's authentic and what is not, what is contrived and what is real. And I think, give people more real exposure, and one of the most interesting findings from the global competency assessment was when you think about multiculturalism, everybody hears about multiple religions in school, but whether students had actually, visited a mosque, visited a church, visited a synagogue, that was the predictor, whether they actually were interested in other kind of ways of, religions or other cultures. So again, I think that, and it's not difficult to do. I just think it's a question of mindset. In fact, it's not expensive to do. A lot of those things, are around the corner. It's not that you have to send your children around the world on very expensive school exchanges and so on. You just open the door, you find lots of spaces where you can actually, and that's why I like Kidzania. I think it's a good example where you create an environment that does just that. It creates a space for learning and a guided space. That's what's important. I don't think it's a random experience. I think that's where the role of adults really comes in, to create that kind of environment where meaningful learning takes place.
Brilliant, thanks. I'm in my wife's school. She's a head teacher at a local school here in the north of England, and her mantra, the school's mantra, is every child is everyone's responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes a very interesting one when we take it outside school into the wider world. Andreas, thank you. And that very neatly takes me to my friend Jim Knight, because we're talking about national policy and national approaches. And Jim, welcome from London. Governments everywhere Jim, as far as I can see, have not really managed to recognize out-of-school educational experiences other than those directly connected with improving attainment levels in school key subjects, such as maths clubs or booster classes or homework clubs, etc. However, in your time under Prime Minister Blair, there were attempts in that direction through funding schemes like Playing for Success, University of the First Age, and My Baby, the Children's University. But it still felt a little like tokenism rather than part of a bigger strategy. Now we've got the edutainment industry, we've got masses of technology and a growing recognition of their value. Jim, can we say that politicians have not noticed how this sector has grown, what scale it's reached and what its potential contribution is? And what do you think needs to happen in terms of policy development for the edutainment sector's potential to be taken seriously?
I think it is fair that politicians, I'm sure, have not seen the potential. And I think that is related to, they think, by and large, and Andreas meets them all the time, ministers around the world, but by and large, I think they're held accountable for what they can control. And they control policy, and through policy, curriculum and assessment, and by and large teacher training. And hopefully they work out how to align all of those. But out of school learning and edutainment in particular, they have no control over, and they're not held accountable for. And so I guess I think it's a nice to have. It'd be a nice win if it helps, but they haven't thought about how you could integrate that. And they haven't fundamentally thought about how we might change the experience of being in school so that it feels a lot more like the engagement of edutainment. Now, within that, I think there is an issue around struggle. I would tend to agree that most real learning comes through some struggle. And there's a lot of ministers who they don't like the idea of children going to school and having fun. It's almost as if they don't like children sometimes. And it's working out that you can have struggle and learn through that struggle, but still be enjoying yourself. And that's what edutainment teaches us. Now, one thing that we did do during those Blair years, all those years ago now, over 10 years ago, was something called extended schools. And that was trying to more systematically use after school activity and preschool activity to support young people in different styles of learning, different forms of learning, and thereby enhance the overall achievement of the child. And actually, of all of the things that we did, extended schools was one of just two where the evidence uncontrovertibly showed that it worked. So we kind of know it works, but I guess the final thing I'd say is what I would really like to see policymakers start to think about is that user experience in school and that sense of changing some of the pedagogy. And it's not fashionable for ministers who normally are not trained teachers, I never was, to interfere in what teaching practice, what pedagogy looks like. But my sense is if we're going to move to more active citizenship, more service learning, more nurturing the active child, then we need more diversity in teaching practice during the school day that frees up some of the time where they're just having to focus because of accountability on teaching the curriculum subject by subject, and the timetable wars crack on with no one being willing to let anything else new in. You haven't got time for edutainment. Crikey, we've got all of these other things to do. We've got to free teachers up, let some of that go, and show them that we can deliver the curriculum in different ways to the model of 20 minutes instruction, then some group work, and then a bit of formative assessment, and whatever the standard model of a lesson looks like. We've got to churn that up a bit. and allow for some difference.
I agree, Jim, and this takes me back to a conversation you and I have quite regularly about trust, and that's probably for another day. But just going on about what you picked or what you mentioned there, and that's for me that this is perhaps specifically England I'm talking about now, although I've discovered that this is not uniquely England in the last 12 months. So in the light of the assessment and examination issues arising during the COVID-19 crisis, are we not better served by not relying on tests only? Certainly in England, we saw that became a bit of a disaster, really. Should we pursue student profiles, for example, which can include tests and examination elements, but also coursework and perhaps even elements of voluntary out-of-school experiences, including edutainment activities? Does that not represent, firstly, better achievements and attainments of the learner, broader, and address better the development of skills and competence?
I definitely agree that we need, again, just more diversity in assessment. I saw something very recently, which was a piece of work looking at the assessment skills of teachers in England, and they're crying out for those skills. Many of them now, because they've joined the profession in recent years, they don't really have any assessment skills. This is all outsourced to assessment companies to do a particular style of assessment. And yet in drama, in art, in dance, we have all of the emphasis on the skill of the assessor to make a judgment that then we all trust. And that shows us that we can we can assess by observation. And that opens up the possibility of doing things in all sorts of different ways. And then you talk about student profiles, and I think, yes, of course, instead of us just wanting to assess the ability of students to recall those bits of the curriculum that we have deemed as ministers and as leaders to be the bits of knowledge that people need in order to thrive in life, we can start to assess how the person, the individual child, and see how what their social, emotional intelligence is, as well as their cognitive function. And that would be really exciting for us to get to that place, because then we can do a much better job of preparing young people for a very uncertain world where they're going to have to change continuously to keep up with all of the changes in the labor market and the changes in society and whatever pandemics are thrown at them through their working life.
I think that's right, Jim. Just briefly, because I know that you sit in this sphere very strongly. I was what my daughter would call an old man by the time I went to the opera for the first time. I'm assuming that you also believe that this experience-based learning is not just a matter of something just during school age, but that it is a lifelong.
Totally. Look, what I've just said about the changing world of work and the certainty of uncertainty is, I'm on my 5th career. I'm not unusual in people having to pivot careers multiple times during their working life. And the only way that you can survive that is through education, is to keep on learning. That is, forget data. The fuel of the new economy is learning. And we have to keep people learning throughout life. And that's not going to be formalized learning as much as it's going to be informal learning. And so you're bang on. Those experiences that we have, my daughter is now an opera director, so I've started going to the opera, not being a big fan, but learning from all of these sources. There's such a rich amount of things that we can learn from all the time now. And crucially, to Andreas's earlier point, learning from each other and connecting with people who are different from us and learning from them, I think, is the absolute core.
Brilliant. Thanks, as ever, Jim. Thanks ever so much. We're just going to fly from London very quickly to Hong Kong now. I think to just have a quick chat with Professor Atara Sivan. Atara, in your opinion, what is leisure education in 2020, or perhaps what was it in 2019? I want to kind of avoid the COVID thing at the moment. And does edutainment form a part of the leisure education?
Well, basically the concept of leisure education, no matter how you define it, is the idea to have to develop values, attitudes, knowledge, and skills relevant to leisure. So people can best utilize it for their own personal growth and the quality of life. So an edutainment was there when I was an undergraduate student and I attended a conference in Germany. This was the first time I came across the word edutainment, and since then it has been adopted all around the world. And actually, the kids don't need us for that. They can just log on and educate themselves through entertainment. But there are also risks, and we should be there to guard them, because leisure education can be content, that you teach the content. It can be in the context. So it could be in the virtual context, or it could be in the theater or whatever it is. But the one I like most is a lifelong process. And I really echo what you're doing so well. We need to start from very early age, all the way on to, it's not just about the skills, the values. You're talking about the Western world, but there are still some places in the world that leisure is totally devalued, and you just have to work and make your living. Positive attitude about it. So if you rest to unwind yourself, because you've been working very hard, lifelong, life, they call it a work-life balance, but it work-leisure balance. Don't think negatively about it. Of course, knowledge to know the resources, as you said very much, the child cannot aspire if he doesn't know what to aspire. So the knowledge is important. If you don't know what other facilities you have apart from the smartphone and anything, then it's not the part of leisure education that this is the part that we miss. And of course, the skills which we as educators, and I do draw on what Jim and Andreas said, we go beyond that. I mean, I train teachers to teach them the supermarket approach, which means the trial and error. The child can try many other things. Apart from learning geography, liberal studies, Chinese, English, whatever, you need to give them the experience. And it's only through the experience is then when they actually develop their standpoint and they know what it is. So it's integration to integrating that in each and every subject. I teach, I work with teachers, and no matter if you teach Chinese or physical education or whatever it is, you can integrate the idea of leisure as something which is beyond the regular studies, life beyond study. This is the idea here. So it's in a nutshell what it is, and people can refer to the Charter for Leisure Education that was basically approved in 1993, and now has been translated to 17 languages and has been part of the United Nations. So it's written very clearly that it's all around, but school supposed to play a major role there because of the equal opportunity, because schools around the world, school exists everywhere. And we should allow the kids, no matter where they are, those that have and those that have not, to be exposed to this opportunity, the supermarket approach, the stimulating experience, community involvement, trial and error, freedom of choice. All those things are in this area of leisure. And leisure education is the process that we are talking about.
And perhaps one of the things that I've kind of observed around I think as a consequence of COVID in many parts of the world is the realization how important schools actually are at the center of communities. Almost that, the Barcelona Football Club motto is more than a club. And yes. I think we've begun to realize, perhaps more in elementary schools than in secondary schools, but the schools are more than the schools. So is it now the opportunity to actively try and revisit that agenda, you think?
Yes, it's interesting because in this side of the world, the eastern side, a little bit late, but they came up to every place here has been going through tremendous reform from all those segmentation of different subjects, going from geography to history to whatever, to what we call integrated curriculum or interdisciplinary learning, the whole person development, life-wide learning, etc., etc., etc. So regardless of the COVID, it's there. But as my colleague said very nicely, if I may, it's about training the teachers to move away from achieving the A star, as you said in one of your talk, to holistic view, as Andreas said, something which goes beyond the actual knowledge and skills, the actual experience. And the experience comes with all the studies about leisure, including mine, show that the kids actually have self-exploration and they have the freedom of choice. You ask them what is the activity that is most interesting and most important to you. And in this activity, they develop their self-concept, self-ideas, self-aspiration, everything. When there is no top-down of teachers, not top-down of achieving, and not top-down of parents, they want them to achieve the highest grades whatsoever, to open the door for further study. So,
I think,
but COVID, yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think that also reminds me of a point Andreas made, which is that it is multiple involvement, isn't it? Because I do tire of that thing about parents sent their children to school so that schools can do their job. And the number of times you hear people saying, well, it's not my job to educate my children. That's the school's job. And I think your approach would widen that, right? Would break
Yes.
down those barriers.
Yes, and I think you mentioned, I think Jim mentioned extended experience, I think, Jim, something like that.
Extended schools.
Extended school, yeah. We have what we call the OLE, other learning experiences. And it's a new way to call what they call the extracurricular activities, because extracurricular implies it's extra. Now they want to make it an integrated part. But the teachers need to know how to do that. And they themselves need to understand what is leisure education and need to be the facilitator rather than those that stand in the way and say, don't do that, you must study the poem because tomorrow I'm going to give you a dictation. So yeah.
Yes, and thank you. And then I think the big challenge for me always is about when we talk about children or we talk about parents or we talk about teachers, I'm not quite sure what the picture is we have in our heads when we talk. And for me, it is always, we need to make the possible, we need to make the possible for the children who are in impossible situations, i.e., the have-nots and therefore the can-nots. And that becomes an exercise not just of individual schools, but collectively, because maybe we should fund some of those activities for kids who can't afford it.
Yes, and some schools, the recent study that I've done, they actually showed that some schools, they call it the facilitators, because they allow special students to stay after school or come on Saturday morning with a very, very low rate to be part of all type of activity, to sing, to dance, to boating, rafting, whatever it is. And this is the only time that the kids are actually exposed to something that they couldn't afford otherwise.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, who is going to appreciate it? As Andreas said, I mean, of course, in pizza, I'm glad to hear that they go beyond the overall development, but those kids may not be able, if they don't get good grades, to get into university. So we need to develop and appreciate the multiple intelligence they have, and to draw on that to open the door for them to work in other setting or contribute like you do in your projects.
I think that's so absolutely true, and thank you for that. And is it? I must just ask that question for the people who've joined us. Is it light for 24 hours in Hong Kong, or is that just an image behind you that you've put up?
No. It's dark now. It's 10:30 p.m. But the sky is very nice because, as I said before, winter in Hong Kong is beautiful. And this picture was taken just 2 weeks ago from my window. And there is a bright future, but we all need educators to boost a little bit. And also in terms of parents' education, I must say that you didn't mention parents here, but there is the My Tiger Mom that just pushed the kids to go to school, and after that tutorial, there's no time to sleep, no time to get. Then at the end of the day, the result speaks by themselves. And
Yes.
I'm just wondering how can we nurture the holistic view and allow them the choice to choose what they want as my study, my research study shows, and they are just self-develop and self-explore themselves and find things that they could not do in a regular square type of curriculum.
Maybe Atara, if as a group we all get our heads together, maybe we can move this forward one way or the other.
Sure.
I would like that very much.
Yes.
I absolutely want to talk to you about this. In terms of the inclusion, I wanted to talk to Eric, my friend Eric Abrams. We're both joint members of the BET Global Education Council, as is Jim. And Eric is Chief Inclusion Officer at Stanford University. And Eric, in these times and the lights that have been shone in the last 9 months or so, for me, the minute we speak about opportunity, and especially when we use the word extra as an extracurricular, for example, I become painfully aware of equality, equity, and reality. And when we talk about inclusion in education, what do we mean? Or rather, what should we mean? And if we're talking about accessibility to edutainment, what context should we take into account? You know, socioeconomic, gender, ethnicity, whatever. Eric, illuminate us with your thoughts, please, on that.
Certainly, and thank you for the question, and hello to everyone from California. You know, in response to your question, I really think that the answer is all of the above. Edutainment has the potential to change the lives of millions of children and adults across the globe, right? And we see aspects of edutainment creeping in everywhere. We know that gamification techniques can increase learners' motivation and engagement by incorporating game design elements into educational environments. Those can vary from the spelling and arithmetic games that are becoming somewhat ubiquitous to the way that various military groups around the world are using games to train their personnel. My issue with edutainment is, how do we ensure that a child in Bangladesh has the same opportunities as a child in Beverly Hills? How do we ensure that this technology doesn't increase inequality? You know, as Professor Schneider stated, when we think about edutainment, and we think about, at least for me, I think about subjects like cognitive resilience. I think that part of that is learning the ability to work well with others. That's going to be crucial in the future workplace. But to work well with others, I think it's important to expose people to others, to expose people to difference, whether those are religious differences, as have already come up, or cultural differences, or working with students with others who have different physical or intellectual abilities. I think that's going to be very, very important in the future. And I think edutainment has the potential to help children do that. Having said that, I fear that poor kids will once again be left behind. I fear that edutainment game developers may miss out on the different play styles of boys and girls. I fear that those of us who see the potential of edutainment may fail to see how it can help people with different physical and intellectual abilities. How can these technologies work with people with developmental delays or physical impairments? I'm really hoping that we can find the way to make the future of edutainment and the future of education accessible to all. As Professor Sivan mentioned the supermarket approach. But I find myself wondering, how does that supermarket approach translate to an area that doesn't have supermarkets? Again, I think it's incredibly important that we find a way to make these things accessible to all, at the risk of sounding like something of a socialist.
Eric, I completely agree. And I think just some thoughts around this, really, and I really look forward to your thoughts. That becomes the responsibility of everybody. We can't just charge one organization or the politicians with this. This is completely everybody's responsibility, including the gaming industry. You use gaming, and let me just paint two scenarios. One is that the gaming industry may need to help the teachers to become better facilitators of the gaming industry as a learning instrument. And secondly, and I would include, of course, Kidzania in this as a physical learning environment, that the industry also has a responsibility to make it affordable for those who can't afford it. we are clever enough, surely, in our data to identify, at least geographically, that we should charge nothing for certain parts of the world and quite a lot for other parts of the world. And so I'm sounding like a socialist now, and Jim just sent me a message saying there's nothing wrong with being a socialist. But let's just call it that we just care about all kids, right? So should we place responsibilities on other sections of society to make this happen? Should we drive it?
Well, of course we should. You know, as you stated so wonderfully earlier about your wife's school, every child is everyone's responsibility. And I think that organizations, companies, you know, I think one of the problems with the rapacious global capitalism that we have is we don't allow space for, you know, some of the brilliant people in the private sector to bring their skills to bear on some of these problems. I can only imagine what would happen if some of the best minds at a Google or an Apple or an SAP were given 5 or 10 hours a week to think about how to make their educational products accessible to everyone. And I think that that's one thing that we should demand of companies and organizations like this, that they do find ways to make their products accessible to everyone, whether that's students from different economic classes, students from different parts of the world, students whose bodies work differently, or students whose minds work differently.
And with that, you know, it always strikes me, it is not that those companies do that deliberately. Sometimes they will have not gone through the thought processes of the differences they could make.
Exactly right.
So that feels to me, right, Eric, that's our job done for the next couple of years then, I think, in terms of trying to get that sorted. Eric, from an inclusion point of view, I asked Jim the question, but from an inclusion point of view, do you think we should pursue student profiles, which can include tests and examinations, coursework, elements of voluntary out-of-school experiences? It strikes me that in many countries, the system of purely just brief tests goes so against so many individuals' potential, because we're measuring such a small part. Would that not better represent achievements as well as attainments, and address better the development of skills? Is it something that you should consider as part of the social mobility agenda, is to widen the profile that we provide for young people?
Well, forgive me, but of course we should. Andreas mentioned the importance of a deliberate social process. Well, I think that schools, especially those of us who have the privilege of being part of the selection process for the next level of schooling, need to think about that deliberate social process, need to think about how we're creating groups of students who can learn from and teach each other. I think that far too often around the world, whether it's the admission process to university, whether it's the admission process to a technical high school or an arts high school, it tends to be based too much on selecting the best individual student. I would like to see us shift that focus just a little bit. And rather than focus on selecting just the best individual, think about building the best cohort. Think about building the best group of students, a group of students who can do the best job of learning from and teaching each other. And if we think of it that way, it has to be very inclusive, right? We have to have people from different economic classes, different faiths, different cultural backgrounds, so that they have the opportunity to learn from and teach each other. I think that to do that effectively, we really need to find ways to find the different strengths of students and what they would bring to the table. You know, I think of an Islamic secondary school student I once knew who started an interfaith discussion group at their high school. Well, my goodness, what college or university doesn't want a student like that in their student body? I knew a young woman in a very, very conservative part of the United States who started a gay-straight alliance at her high school and later expanded it throughout her city. Well, isn't that a wonderful opportunity for people to learn across difference? And I think that that's one of the things we need to think about when we think about the future of edutainment. How can we use the technology to help people learn about and across differences?
Eric, thank you so much for that. We're going to go now from straight back to Moscow. Sergey Kosaretsky, where the university in Moscow has been using Kidzania data as part of a research project, and I wanted to find out a bit more about that and how that can be used to make things better. So Kidzania globally, as an edutainment center, holds historical and current data on some 90 million children, and we want this data and its analysis to be used for the greater good, to create a little bit of a better world. For example, using Kidzania data, the University of Oxford is involved in doctoral studies globally researching children's attitudes to money. But we're also engaging with market research and PR companies to gain and communicate other insights. In the Institute of Education at the Higher School of Economics, Sergey, you've utilized Kidzania Moscow's data in your research. And my first questions have to be around, why did you do that? And what was it that you were researching?
Hello, colleagues. For us, it's a very important research question about educational potential of edutainment centers and Kidzania, for instance. The High School of Economics Institute of Education was the first in the country, in Russia, in systematically study of the non-formal education and edutainment sector, focusing on the models, practices, children's interests, and families' requests. Because the second decade of the 21st century in Russia was a period of rapid growth of this sector. Interactive science museums, cities of professions, etc. took a special place in it. This practice became an important component of the service economy, forming a new image of the modern urban environment for both residents and tourists. At the same time, questions about the characteristics of educational potential of edutainment centers are rare subjects of research and scientific discussion. We focused on the educational potential of cities of professions and the place of such centers in the educational space on a modern urban child. Kidzania, the most ambitious and globally distributed edutainment franchise, and it is the largest edutainment center in Moscow. We tried to identify the specific skills and develop in Kidzania. We were also interested in tools for these outputs. We used data from interviews with parents, teachers, and from our observation, and we received very interesting results. Should I tell about it?
I can't wait, because I haven't seen all of those yet, Sergey. So I'd be very interested. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm really grateful for you about your support and access to data, because we have unique quantitative data of more than 30,000 children from Kidzania in Moscow. Not only interviews, but really good quantitative data. Some words about our results. According to our research, new experience is the most important Kidzania attribute. It provides reproducible and control opportunities for obtaining experience in several main subject areas: financial activity, professional activity, civic activity, charity, and also in meta-subject areas: communication, collaboration, independence, agency. And it is also important that experience at Kidzania is associated with positive emotions, with the joy of achieving a result, even it is a game limited by the script. Immersive organization and design game, Kidzania's environment is the basis of activities, and the supervisor's position, positive emotions, high expectations, role model, positive feedback, provide uniqueness, realism, and positive emotional content. And the specific value of experience lies in its motivational potential. The ability to arouse interest creates a basis for further acquaintance with the subject or type of activity.
Thank you, Sergey. Sergey, you pay special attention to the position of families, and it seems that they define the quest for extracurricular education practices and for edutainment. What are your observations around that?
Thank you, Professor. Parents is our special interest. Parents are aware of the insufficiency of the knowledge and skills set in the school curriculum. They see in what narrow boundaries the school evaluates the abilities and achievements of their children. They see how poorly the school format copes with the task of maintaining the children's curiosity, cognitive interest, and learning motivation. The problem of learning motivation is very serious now. Today, there is a demand from families to support children's motivation to study. It seems that parents are looking for opportunities to gain experience outside of school. They largely turn to formal extracurricular activity programs. There are a lot of such programs in Russia, especially in Moscow. However, it is also set some boundaries in meeting the family's request. They are critical of waste of time, but worry about children's overload. Hence the special interest in formats that are not pure entertainment. They prefer leisure with benefits instead of just leisure or extra portions of educational interaction. That's why Kidzania's format is becoming popular for parents and also in their children.
Thank you, Sergey. So interestingly, the parent as co-educator is beginning to come back to life, and we'll go to Natalia in a minute to kind of discuss that from a Moscow position. In the meantime, Eric Abrams kind of raised his hand, I think, and wanted to add something. Eric, are you still with us? Eric?
Microphone,
Yes,
Eric.
I'm sorry about that. I was muted and looking at a colleague's biography.
No worries.
For those of you who are interested in how technology and gaming can shape youth learning, particularly underserved communities, I want to encourage you to look at the work of my colleague Antero Garcia. He's an assistant professor at Stanford who's spent a number of years as a teacher at a public high school in Los Angeles, California, and he co-designed the Critical Design and Gaming School as a public high school in an underserved areas of Los Angeles. And his work, I think, dovetails exactly with what we're talking about. And I'd encourage you to look at it, and I'll put a link to his biography in the chat, if that's all right.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Eric. And thank you, Sergey, as well. And Sergey, we'll be meeting hopefully in Moscow many times next year when this pandemic has died down. Eric tells me he was in Moscow many years ago and actually studied in Moscow. So this is becoming quite a get-together. The Natalia Kiseleva is the Deputy Minister of Education for Moscow. And it's lovely to have you with us, Natalia. In a city as rich in opportunity as Moscow, I expect you engage in utilizing out-of-school learning opportunities to a very significant degree in your education provision. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, please?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello, Professor. I am so sorry for my English. I am a typical example of the old training system, educational system. I have a lot of knowledge and a few skills, probably because my education was based on academical knowledge only without entertainment. So now I am teaching math through a real life project. I think it's very important, and math is a great at integration, learning and entertainment. And not only mathematics. Colleagues, I want to give you a little information about Moscow education. First of all, in Moscow now, today in Moscow, more than 1.5 million children receive education, and more than 100,000 pedagogical workers. The task of Moscow education is to develop the talents of each child and find his place in the city economy in the future. For 5 years, our educational system has been implementing a large city project, integration of different levels of education to achieve high educational result. The goal of this project is to form the students' skills and abilities necessary for life and future professional in the high tech and of the city. We understand that knowledge without skills is practically useless, and we have about 9 pre-professional projects at the school. For example, engineering class in Moscow schools. More than 100 schools and 9,000 students study not only in school, but they have less lectures and research at federal universities and have lectures with professors from the universities. Medical class in Moscow school is a second project. Medical class introduced students to the practice activities and tools of medical workers, conducting elementary medical manipulations and applied scientific research. I want to show you a small video about medical class. I think you will be interested. I hope you can see this video. This from school, Moscow school, 1409. Is, as you see, students study knowledge and they will have tools in medical practice. We understand that only integration, entertainment and educational system, traditional knowledge education, will have good opportunities for each student and this education in each school. The third project is academical, scientific or technological class in Moscow school. We have about 28 schools and about 2,000 students. Academic class with modern robot and robot constructions, digital laboratories for physical chemistry, biochemistry, ecology, physics, chemistry, and different projects. New project, a new class in this our projects IT class and pedagogical class. About 2 or 3 months, they were opened. IT class in Moscow with modern laboratory with field of information technologies. Pedagogical class students have classes, have possibility to be a teacher, to be trainer, and have opportunities to help teacher in the different classes in different schools. And we understand that now education can be limited to the school building, classroom, and teachers. Education today encompasses as all the resources and capabilities of the city. The goal of the school is not to convey a set of knowledge and information to the child, but to become a guide to each child in life. To show all the possibility on our city or on the world. We organize online education now, and our task is to build such a model of hybrid education in Moscow, in which we can help each student draw the educational route for the child with school or out the school education, integration, entertainment, and learning. Integration, for example, theater lesson and mathematics lesson. And we understand that a lot of different projects realized in high school. But now we understand that in elementary school and secondary school, we need to include different organization, for example, Kidzania, which can help us to organize new project for school children in elementary school, and give us chance to show large possibility our country and Moscow, and give the way to understand what they want to do in the future. For each child, it's very important.
Thank you so much for that. And I think this kind of links, Natalia, to some of the early email conversations that you and I have had about creating learning cities, whereby the city becomes the classroom rather than just the classroom in the school. Do you think, as a final kind of brief question, some children are richer than other children? So do you think that because of the model you have or you are advocating, that the society will need to provide additional help for children, for SES children who are socioeconomically disadvantaged?
I think in Moscow we have a similar possibility for each student, and we don't have large difference between students and their families. All our students have a large possibility, first of all, in their schools. And we integrated a lot of interesting projects in each school. But I know that in other regions in Russia, the situation is different. And we know that a lot of students haven't possibility to study online because they haven't good internet, and it's problem. In Moscow, we think about next project, we think about next interesting ideas to integration with our school, because we have good technical opportunities and possibility in each school and family of our students, each families.
Thank you, Natalia. I look forward to visiting Moscow next year and to spending some time with you. I'd like to go finally to Professor Isak Froumin, who's the head of the Institute of Education at the Higher School of Economics. Isak, firstly, thank you very much to the Institute for hosting today's event. Isak, can we say that the development of the non-formal sector is part of the process of the increasing complexity of the education system?
And thank you for the initiative to expand, to globalize the discussion about non-formal education. I'm so thrilled to see colleagues from UK, from Holland, talking about similar issues. And I really like, I'm looking forward to read Professor Sivan's book on leisure I really like this this wording. And think, answering to your question, I do think becoming as critical part of the education system as traditional formal education. Yes, I think so, and this is why we created a research group to study this phenomenon. And all our studies confirm that.
Isak, I'm
We
sorry
cannot ignore the fact that, yeah?
I'm sorry to interrupt. The sound is quite, yeah, the sound is quite poor. So perhaps if you turn the video camera off, we might be able to hear you. Is that?
Let's see.
That's better.
Okay, sorry. That sometimes again we it's not you know kind of periphery of education system, and this is why we created a laboratory to study the phenomenon on non-formal education. We can tell for sure that every educated family, every middle-class family, non-formal extracurriculum, you can name it, education opportunity for their kids. And I agree with Eric that there is a big problem of inclusivity. In fact, we recently discussed it with Professor Reimers from Harvard, and asked him why there are not many education. And he said, well, because we see non-formal education as a factor for growing inequality, which is true. Which is true. We know that again, more educated families, more affluent families tend to bring more non-formal educational experience, edutainment. Is it normal, or should we look at this reality from education policy perspective and think about complex systems that will be public system and that will include non-formal educational experience?
My final question, Isak, is about, and it's very clearly linked to this, it's about when we kind of look at that development, what about quality control? Or should the non-formal sector be left alone and left to be the non-formal sector, and we don't bother with quality control? What's your view?
Frankly, I have that we have to study and think more about that. And that's a question for public policy in general. On the one hand, we are responsible for the quality of public services. We are responsible for students' well-being, but methods that control, or almost all methods, for their accountability becoming a real burden for the sector, becoming real problems for creativity of educators, for variety, for diversity of the services. So your question, in fact, for me, is a signal that we don't know enough about this sector. We don't know enough about quality assurance practices. Some of my colleagues think that we have to rely upon users' experience or users' evaluation, maybe, but again, who are teachers, kids, or so. Professor Gauss, I think that again your questions are very valid, but they show that we don't know enough about this sector, about its links with formal education. Because let me finish with one observation. Natalia just told about very experience in Moscow, where we see a lot of interesting activities for the kids. But you know where they come from? They came from where they came from. They came from informal sector. They were not invented within the formal sector. They were invented outside of schools in this voluntarily within this mainstream. So I guess again, we are living in the very interesting time of significant changes in the educational landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Isak. And I think for me the interesting thing there is that that's okay, and we are at the foothills of finding out more. And I think collectively that we can completely do this. Thank you again, Isak. Thank you to everybody else today. It is nearly the end of today's getting together. And doesn't time fly when you're entertained and when you're learning at the same time? It remains for me to thank my guests, Isak Froumin, Natalia Kiseleva, Sergey Kosaretsky, Atara, Sivan, Eric Abrams, Jim Knight, and Andreas Schleicher for shining very bright lights on a very important educational conundrum, and for leaving me personally filled with optimism. We wanted to present today as a first webinar of the kind. We wanted to present a global jigsaw, a global puzzle, and show some pieces to arrive at a bigger picture. And I think, I feel that we have. I hope to see everybody again soon. A big thank you goes to the audience, wherever you are, for being with us. This episode will appear on YouTube in due course, along with some of the answers to your questions, which we will film afterwards. Thank you to the National Research University, Higher School of Economics, Institute of Education, as well as EdCrunch for making today's event possible. And my special thanks goes to Ivanov, without whom none of this would have happened. If there's one wish that comes from today, my personal professional wish for 2021, it is that we as a panel continue our discussions and form an allegiance to positively move this important agenda forward and onwards and upwards, and perhaps under the auspices of the National Research University. I hope, my dear colleagues, that you are with me in this, and that we can meet again to plan this further and discuss this important topic further. And then finally, it is December. I would like to take this opportunity to wish you all a healthy end to 2020 and a very happy start to 2021. Be safe, be well, be happy, and above all, please be kind. If there's anything that will get us through the current malaise, it is kindness. Thank you again for being here, and goodbye.
Bye.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your participating. It was, I think, such a great discussion. I want to remind you that our panel discussion was organized and hosted by the National Research University with the support of EdCrunch, and we are the part of its program. And you can use special promo code edutainment for a discount for the 3 days online ticket. So have a nice day. Thank you very much, and see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, colleagues. Thank you so much, Ivan.